We're here to celebrate the life of Rich Ritzenthhaler this afternoon. My name is Scott. I'm the pastor of this church, and we welcome you here to join us this afternoon. I met Rich a number of years ago, and I want to tell some stories when we get into smoke and share time, but it's a pleasure to have you here this afternoon. Just a couple of comments before we begin. We're going to have an opening prayer by family member here pretty soon. The eulogy, we've got a slideshow to share with you. And the real blessing for me as a pastor of this church is that when we were planning this, we realized very quickly that Rich had left a Christian legacy in this family, and that you guys are so well equipped in Christ that you're going to handle the service on your own. Very little time. So, and really, it's just ideal to see a group of people in a family that just loves Jesus and knows how to serve Him and to minister, and for you guys just to be able to handle this yourselves. It's just wonderful. So I compliment you with your family legacy. I also took note this morning, or this afternoon as you guys were arriving here, that on a typical Sunday morning, at 6'1", I'm a fairly tall guy in the church. In fact, I'm taller than most. And I feel very short here on this tonight. This is a whole different thing for me. You guys are making some big people in this family. Wonderful. All right, so let's begin. David, would you come up and get us started in prayer?
I'm very appreciative of this opportunity for us to pray and come before the Lord's presence. And I just wanted to comment about one thing before I do. Some of you got the email, but Richard made it known to Jane that he loved the idea of Christians wearing white, because all the saints were going to be wearing white in heaven. And I'm so glad he mentioned that, because it makes it real easy for me to understand who the saints are. So anyway, would you join me as we pray together, all of you saints? Heavenly Father, we just thank you for such an amazing privilege of being able to come into your presence and give thanks and be happy about my brother, my best friend of years, being with you right now. And that makes it a joyous moment, while at the same time I feel the loss of my best friends. So Lord, we come in your presence to glorify you and to give thanks for what you did in and through Richard. It's in your great name, Jesus, I pray. Amen. Amen.
Thank you all for coming so much. It means a lot to all of us, and I know to Richard too. And I thought I made the font big enough, but I'm not sure.
I can hold it.
Remembering Richard. How do we do that? How do you sum up the life of a 77-year-old man in a few minutes? I was challenged to write a eulogy that someone else, Pastor Scott perhaps, or another family member would read. You know, the Richard Lyle Ritzenthaler was born on blah blah and to blah blah blah. A dry litany in the third person, reciting all the sometimes boring facts of what he did and when. But that wouldn't have told you who he was. Not really. I knew him better than anyone else, other than Amy and Mike, of course, but I knew him for a lot longer than they have. So I want to describe the man as God created him, regardless of whether or not he portrayed that 24/7. I have a dear friend in Panama who lost her husband just a few weeks ago, and she commented about his memorial service in an email saying, "It was great to learn more about Vic from the remembrances of others." And I had to chuckle. I hope there aren't going to be any surprises. But this is his story. Actually our story, and how God grabbed hold of a broken man and shaped him into the image of his son, Jesus. So let me paint a picture for you of who Richard was, and praise God who he finally is in God's presence. Richard was a very unique man, extremely gifted, both artistically and musically, but also out of the box creatively. At 5 years old, he was taking stuff apart, figuring out how it worked, and fortunately putting it back together. But he was also a perfectionist. His mother told the story of when he was very little, he was trying to paint a picture of a car. He got so frustrated, he was crying. He was trying to paint the radio antenna, but all he had was a big, humongous brush to use. Now, Richard was the oldest of 6 kids, all about a year apart. When he was first born, his father, Lyle, was stringing phone lines, and I think Ryan or somebody said it was across the Snake River. I mean, it wasn't just, around the corner. So they moved around frequently, usually staying in motels. His bed usually consisted of a dresser drawer. David followed 14 months later, then Lynn, Ryan, Diane, and Robert. Somewhere in there, Dad Ritz left the job with Ma Bell, and they settled down in Barrington, Illinois. They bought a piece of property on Glendale Avenue, intending to build a home. But Dad was building it himself as the money became available. He completed the basement before funds temporarily ran out, so he covered it over, and that's where the family of 8 lived for several years. 5-gallon buckets for toilets. You get the picture. Richard and David remember waiting for the school bus a couple of houses down the street because they didn't want anyone to know where they lived. The house was completed a few years later and was the family home for more than 40 years, I think, right? We also recognized along the way that Richard was slightly autistic. He literally did not think the same way other people do. For example, when his sister Diane was about a year old, the family was getting ready for church. Put her shoes on, his dad said, motioning to Richard's little sister. But I can't. Dad said it again, very, very forcefully. Put her shoes on. Richard started to wail, I can't! Then it dawned on Lyle that Richard thought he was supposed to put her shoes on himself. But obviously they weren't going to fit. So those challenges to thought patterns plagued him throughout his life, compounded by his creative mind. Music was in the family's DNA. Lyle had a dance band in the 30s, but gave it up when he got married. By the time the siblings were in their preteens, they were playing music at various churches and events. Now, I met Richard when I was a junior in high school. His sister Diane and I were in the same class, and she thought her older brother, by 4 years, would be interested in this young redhead. Their youngest brother, Robert, was in the school musical Brigadoon, and I happened to be there. No date, I was just there by myself. During intermission, she pointed me out to him, the across the crowded room thing, and apparently he was interested. A few days later at school, she showed me his picture, that one right down there, and I was definitely interested. But it took him almost a month to call me and ask me out for a date. He arrived at my door in a sage green Brooks Brothers suit, a matching hat, and a camel hair coat. To take me where? To a Northwestern football game. I know, but this was 1961. Things were quite different back then. The best part was that we acknowledged to each other later that neither of us even liked football. After the game, we went to a party at his business partner's condo in Chicago. Not only was I on a blind date, but I knew absolutely no one there. But God knew why I was there. Sitting on the couch was a young man talking about Jesus, as if he were alive and walking the streets of the city. Turns out he was the head of Campus Crusade for Christ at Northwestern, and listening to him talk, the proverbial light bulb went on in my head. Now, I've been raised in a Christian family, went to church every Sunday. My dad was a deacon, taught Sunday school, but I realized that night that being a Christian wasn't just knowing about Jesus, it was having a personal relationship with him. Richard was also raised in a Christian home, and he went forward as a child because his cousin did. But as he told it, it wasn't until after we were divorced that he was really impacted with who Jesus is. But more about that later. We We were married in June of 1964. We had 2 wonderful children, Amy and Michael. But Richard really had a hard time connecting emotionally with any of us. He operated almost totally from his mind. After Mike was born and we recognized that our marriage was falling apart, I remember him praying for the Lord to show him how to love his children. I just didn't realize what that would look like. Feeling like I was going down for the 3rd time, I was desperate to find myself. Remember, this was the 60s. And I got involved in acting workshops and modeling. Within 2 years, we were divorced. For a while, I had the kids with me in Chicago, but I quickly realized my crazy lifestyle wasn't good for them. So they went to live with Richard in Crystal Lake, a suburb of Chicago. He tried the dating thing, but soon recognized that he couldn't handle it all. He made a conscious commitment to his children, putting them first for the next 18 years. Meanwhile, I was wandering in my own personal desert, still trying to find myself. I married again, divorced again, and that was the beginning of Richard growing closer to the Lord and discovering that his gift was encouragement. His passion has been to walk alongside men, discovering how to follow Jesus at a deeper level. Now, this is not about you, Ted. He was drawn to the messy ones. The difficult ones that were socially unacceptable, or who had tough issues such as homosexuality. But he loved them through it all, and he was Jesus to them. A side note here. I think most of us are all too familiar with children affected by the nasty, vindictive divorces of their parents. It causes lifelong trauma, very difficult to overcome. But Richard was different. Mike and Amy have attested to the fact that over the 17 years we were divorced, Richard never said one negative, spiteful thing about me. Not that he approved of my behavior, but I was their mother, and he wouldn't disrespect that. Those first few years living back in the same town together were challenging. It was very difficult for me to recognize how the Lord had been changing Richard. Those old tapes kept playing over and over and over. But the Lord did a miracle, and in 1988, we remarried, just a few days after Amy gave birth to our first grandchild, Cammie. In fact, Amy was holding in her arms. You were the flower girl. Well, you didn't know it. It still amazes me at how the Lord restores and reconciles relationships. Years of psychotherapy can't begin to accomplish the same result. I've watched my husband over the years struggle with failed business enterprises, personal betrayals, and feeling inadequate. When he was in one of those moments of depression, talking about what a failure he was, I tell him that none of that really mattered. He'd succeeded at what was truly important. Our children were walking with the Lord and had a vital impact for his kingdom because of him. So I guess the Lord answered his prayer to learn how to love his children. I suppose I should mention some of the more supposedly mundane things he did. He held patents in the plumbing field, and correct me if I'm wrong, Don, for a ceramic cartridge single-handle faucet, a swivel pull-down kitchen faucet aerator, and the first lead-free water filtration spigot. But he most loved designing spaces. He loved both new home designs and remodels. He could visualize things that the average person just simply couldn't. He also had his general contractor's license. One of the last projects here in the U.S. was for Gary and Linda Martin. He tore out the central part of their home, raising the ceiling and creating a new living space and kitchen. To this day, Linda says, "Did you really know it would look like this?" Yes, that was his amazing gifting. When asked, he'd say that what he loved most was designing and then making what he designed. He never truly was able to express all the creativity that was in him. Painting, sculpting, designing new products, and his music. Ever since we were married the first time, I loved listening to him play the piano. In later years, it was the keyboard. But he didn't just play what someone else had written. No, he'd sit down and play what was in his head, just what he heard. It was he was a night owl back in those days, and I loved falling asleep just listening to his music. What you were hearing today as you came in is just a snippet of what had been preserved by the recording capability of his last keyboard. It was so hard watching him the last 10 months of his life, seeing him decline both physically and mentally. He so desperately just wanted to do something, but his body wouldn't cooperate. He lost touch with time and could no longer connect the dots. But God was preparing him, wrapping up the dangling threads of his life. Those of you that know the Ritzenthalers on a deeper level are aware that it is a splintered family. Unforgiveness and bitterness run deep. But God, in His amazing grace, allowed Richard to be restored to each of his siblings and to his mother. My prayer is that the same reconciliation will occur amongst the remaining siblings. A month or so before he died, the Lord gave me a vision of him. I was sitting in Mike and Don's front room. I looked left towards where our bedroom was, and I saw him standing there. He looked over his shoulder at me. He was young, he was handsome, and he was healthy, with long artistic hands and fingers, unmarred by rheumatoid arthritis. He was laughing, and music was just pouring out of his head. And that's exactly what he's doing now.
Hello everyone, I'm Amy, I'm Rich Ritz's daughter, for those of you who don't know, and I just want to thank each one of you for coming and celebrating his life with us today. It means so much to all of us, and my brother was one. And my dad determinedly, unselfishly chose us first. He set aside fully pursuing his dreams to help us discover ours. Our childhood was glorious. Truly it was. We grew up on our grandparents' 200-acre retreat center farm in the Midwest. Being raised by him and our grandparents, we learned what it meant to work really hard and then to play even harder. There was long, hot summer days. They were playing in the creek. A lot of my cousins here remember these days well. After we had to weed the several-acre farm first, of course, we had homemade hooch underneath a tree made of vinegar, water, nutmeg, and sugar. There was fireflies. I don't know if any of you have ever been to the Midwest. Fireflies are the best. Root beer floats at night on the back porch, and many joyous memories of all of us cousins getting together summer after summer after summer. And the winters were even more amazing because there were snow forts and sledding into the wee hours of the night, an ice rink, a snowmobiling expedition every year, and our dad, along with our grandparents, immersed us in a childhood of exploring and adventuring and imagination. But the farm was also the first place that I began to understand what it meant to love and minister to people. There was always someone at the dinner table, someone hurting and broken, being cared for and counseled because the farm was a place of refuge. My dad had such an amazing, compassionate heart, as my mom already mentioned, for the messy and the broken, because he was one too. There were prayer and praise nights at the farm filled with music. There was always music. My grandpa playing the saxophone, my dad playing the piano. In fact, it was me first learning to find my voice and that I could harmonize. And one of my favorite memories as a child, almost every night, falling asleep to my dad playing the piano. I learned how to decompress. I learned how to pray. I learned how to worship listening to him, and I imagined him doing the same. My daddy was the first. My daddy was the first to show me what a loving father looked like. He was the man who led me to Jesus at 8 years old. The greatest gift that I didn't know at the time I would need. My dad celebrated me. I was uniquely created. In fact, he empowered and released me to be all that God had wired me to be. In fact, early on, my dad recognized and encouraged and celebrated the leadership gifts that I had. In fact, never once did it ever occur to me that being female should ever deter me. I was God's child, he told me, created marvelously, but also with the capacity for sin and a need for a Savior. He He loved me fiercely, but he called me on my crap. He was relentless. He didn't let me get away with anything. Fiercely prayed, he battled for me, he taught me how to have the hard conversations, and always pursued communication through it all. He knew the difference between surface relationships and deep, meaningful ones, and he challenged me always to engage at that level, that it was worth it. So messy, but oh so marvelous. He taught me to listen carefully to the quiet whisper of the Holy Spirit in my life, to recognize God speaking and leading. And I didn't realize until later in my life that I learned to have an unwavering trust in God's voice because of my dad's voice first in my life. I trusted God as my father because I first learned to trust my dad as my father. I've done this often through the years, but the last few visits here in Arizona, I took extra time and care to recount back to him, remind him of the profound impact that he's had in my life. I got to hold him, his frail body reduced to under 90 pounds as the cancer waged war on his body. We laid on his bed for hours telling stories, laughing, crying, reminiscing, reminding me how difficult I was to raise, embracing this precious time that was slipping away, savoring the deep relationship that we had shared for so many years. One that I know not all daughters have with their dads. And tears streamed down his face as I got to affirm him the way that he had done so many years for me, to remind him of his legacy. Because if he didn't see anything of his life as successful, but the deep commitment to raise my brother and I to be Jesus-loving people, he had arrived. Because most oftentimes he didn't see the full weight of who he was, not what he had done. He didn't make a lot of money. In fact, he was pretty terrible at it. He didn't feel that he'd been all that successful in business or his artistry, but I told him that what really mattered, what I believed that God had called him to be, he was beyond limit. Quietly, humbly, gently, strongly, fiercely faithful, he loved deeply, just like Jesus did. And he taught me to do the same. I said to my brother when he was ushered into heaven, now he'll know. Now who he is, who God fully intended him to be, today is now fully realized. He's free, and I can't wait to see him there, and I won't stop smiling. My daddy is still one of the most amazing men that I've ever known. After all, he was my very first hero, and he always will.
So his idea was to have the slideshow and the song before we talked. That wasn't good for me. My sister could come speak. That's not good either for me. But yeah, same as Amy, I'm so thankful you guys are here. I feel like I'm probably, in a sense, preaching to the choir because I know each one of you guys knew him well. So it's kind of fun. Some of you maybe not as well as others, but like Mom said, it's kind of hard to describe somebody in a few minutes, and so that gives me comfort that we all knew him. Because Dad was pretty unusual, I think, you know, and obviously as a son, you have your perspective and other people have theirs, but the first thing that came to mind when I was thinking about remembering Dad in this way was Dad's mind. I just thought about the kind of exceptional mind, different, like Mom said, you know, some of his thoughts of autism in there too, but just the creativity, really the brilliance that was there, it was innate, it was God-given, and it was unique. For me as a kid, you know, he had this capacity to understand all things mechanical, artistic, design, you know. At times, for me, it would seem like, you know, he really did know everything, and every kid has this somewhat that perspective about their parents, but when it came to things like mechanical or what stuff was made of, it was like, I'd go ask Dad something, well, you know, how does this work? And it was like, there was no hesitation. It was like, well, you know, he explained the whole thing to me. What material would be best for this? Oh, it's this particular plastic one. It's like, how do you know this? You know, I feel like today it's Google, you know? Remember, it's like, literally, I've had it several different times, and, you know, since Dad's passed even, that I went, I should ask. No, I can't do that, you know? And it's like, that literally was a common thing for me. Uncle Ryan's one like that too on building stuff, but that Dad just had this incredible capacity for things that he was interested in, just to soak it in, and it was there. And the funny thing, and I didn't realize this some of this fully until recently, is that some of the things that he did successfully and well in those areas, building and creating and designing, he didn't have any training in. And I just sort of assumed as a kid, knowing that he had worked in product engineering and designing things with CAD and so on, first the drafting board, before that, these intricate things, that Dad had engineering, training, schooling. No, he didn't, and I didn't really fully even realize that until we talked just recently. I said, "You're kidding me? So wait, you didn't go to any of those things?" No, that just kind of blew me away. It was like, how in the world is that possible? If he wanted to make something, it was like he just started the process of doing it. He might reference something, or it might just come kind of fully formed out of his mind. Hey, Don, hand me that thing right here, please. As Mom said, Dad didn't do a lot of the things that he was capable of in his life, just time, money, those different kinds of things. But this aspect of creativity and creating from his mind, I didn't even know Dad could do any sculpting. I don't know that I remember him doing some clay modeling maybe when he was doing stuff in the early years or whatever, but I'd never seen anything like that. And this was a project that Don probably knows better than I do, but for a client, there was a faucet this client wanted to make out of brass, and they wanted a lion head, is my understanding, and they didn't have anything to work from to do this. So Dad literally just made his own. And that picture shows him making it. And this is kind of messed up now because it's been in my house and gotten things busted up, but there was two of them. He just goes and sculpts the thing and then has it cast for this, these people that manufacture. So it's just, to me, and understand that in my family, I'm not the creative one, that some of my other relatives are. So it's just like, that's not possible. I could try that for 20 years and it would come out like, okay, never mind, And he just would sit down and do this. So that kind of stuff just always blew me away. But one of the other thoughts was, and it's been touched on also, is that Dad loved and pursued people. There was this thing, there was a thread running through all the time. And there was a time, obviously, where he was broken from the divorce, where he turned to the Lord, and it changed him. He began to say, "Lord, do with me what you need to do, and I'll do it." And a thread that came through that all the way from when we were kids through his last days was that he wanted to disciple, he wanted to encourage, he wanted to love people. And like somebody like Amy shared it, and Mom both, that he would tend to seek out those people that sometimes they were the ones that nobody else was willing to take time for. I think of a friend of his named Warren. And one of those things where God works out things. Dawn and I were out for dinner one time in the Phoenix area one night, and I think after coming out or something, this gentleman, homeless apparently, comes up and asks us for help. I think we gave him some money, or maybe I can't remember if we gave him money or took him somewhere to give him food or whatever. But talked to him and found out that he knew Jesus, and it seemed legitimate. And people will tell you those things, and it was like, I really believe this guy really does, and why is he out here doing this, whatever. So we spent a little time with him, and we left. We show up at church on Sunday morning and turn around, and Mom and Dad said, "We'd like to introduce you to someone. This is Warren." And we went, "We've met Warren." And here he was, and Warren became a close friend with Dad. Dad spent lots of time with him. He had a life of alcoholism, drug use, if I remember correctly. He came out of that and lived sober, many years sober. Anyway, very accomplished guy prior to and after. Anyway, just one of those kind of guys. That was Dad's life. There was always these people that he was spending time with, and you'd see the impact of him pursuing these people. Like Amy touched on, Dad's example for us taught us a lot about who God was through his example. What he lived out, how he treated us, how he treated others, allowed us, our faith to be in God, to be colored by that, and dramatically, profoundly impacted by seeing Dad model out these Christian characteristics for us. He was both strong and tender-hearted. He was a firm father. He was a disciplinarian in terms of expecting order in us to do things that were right. He He told us that we needed to live with integrity and truth, and yet at the same time, he had this tender heart that he knew you, and he saw you, and he dealt with when you were hurting. He's like, he knew, you know, so amazing combination, which is God. You know, that's the same thing. Like Amy said, he taught us the work, which Grandpa passed on to all these kids of his, and I got to experience some of that firsthand with Grandpa too, because we lived there. But both Dad and Grandpa, that was something they didn't just teach us to work; they taught us that actually there's joy in it. That it's not that it's easy, but that there's a product of it that's good, and that you actually enjoy it in the process. So a big thing. A funny thing for me when I was a kid, he would tease me and call me the can't kid, because I was lazy. I didn't want to do stuff, and so he'd be like, you know, I'd say, I can't do that, Dad. He'd say, oh, the can't kid again, you know, whatever. And then he'd say, no, you know, I'm not going to let you off the hook here. You're going to do this. He taught us to be honest, real, authentic in life, not just putting on a show, basically, you know, being real about, like Amy said, owning your own crap, that kind of thing. But where that started wasn't from telling us to do that. It started from him modeling that I mean, being a parent now, it's not that easy to admit you're wrong as a parent. When you're in that role of authority sometimes, you feel like, well, I need to keep up a good front here, you know, so listen to me. Dad wasn't like that, and although he was very much, like I said, firm. I was thinking about a circumstance, and one particular example of this was one day at our house in Alden, Illinois. We lived in a three-story schoolhouse with our living apartment on top. I think it was the offices at the lower, and I think there was like a shop kind of thing on the very bottom, right? But Dad had his desk, and Dad always had cool stuff because he was a design guy. You know, he always had little things that were interesting and cool. Maybe as kids, of course, you got to go check that stuff out and look at it and play with it or whatever. He always was one that, you know, put my stuff back. You know, when you put things back where they belong. Well, there was something in there. We were talking about what it was specifically, some kind of coin or something. And one day, Dad comes in, he's looking for this coin. He knows exactly where it is. It isn't there. And so he individually grabs each of us and says, "Hey, you know, who's got my coin? Where'd it go?" And either one, we don't have it. You know, we point at each other. She did it. You know, he did it, and nothing comes of it. And so we get to the point, well, I'm going to spank you if you don't tell me the truth or whatever. We're crying, you know. And I don't know. We don't know if he felt in his pocket or it was just nearby or something. But somehow, at that moment, at the moment of truth, he finds it, and Dad immediately was like, "I am so sorry," you know, and we were like, "Yes!" It wasn't, you know, but that was just one example, and that was a common thing for Dad. It wasn't he wasn't prideful about having to be right with us. If he really did make a mistake, he would just own it and say, you know, "Hey guys, you know, I didn't do that right." And in the same way, even with Mom. He talked about that he didn't ever say anything negative about Mom. That is the truth. He didn't. And he even was one that was said, you know, I didn't do things right. There was reasons why we got divorced. We both were wrong at points, but he owned up to that stuff and was honest about it. So that was huge. I mean, it was a matter for me to be recognized. That's a standard to stay by. Dad taught me how to think. Meaning, he wouldn't allow you not to think. Again, the same way, you know, the laziness tendency for me was when your dad knows everything, you can just go, "Well, tell me how to do that," or whatever. And Dad's answer, he would ask a question. If you're working on something, I don't understand. Well, okay, well, what if you did this? What would that do? And it was like he made this process of, you're going to critically think through this and determine something on your own. I'm not just going to give you the answers to stuff in life, which was big. He even talked about it, but he made a point at that time in his life, and after in terms of turning to the Lord, that he was going to put others first. That we recognized it as kids, as young kids. I don't know if that's normal, but we saw this sacrifice that Dad was making. We felt it, we knew it. We didn't talk to him about it so much, I don't think, but we saw it. It was like Dad was a handsome guy, and he chose not to date during that time. It was like, and I don't know if I talked to him after or later, but to my understanding of it, was a distraction to what he felt God had called him to do with raising his kids. And he had opportunities, and he was like, he just didn't pursue it on that. He he had made a lot of money early in his life, and he chose, it's not, I don't think it's a coincidence, he chose to be around us, working in a job that was close to us most of the time through our growing up years. So he was around instead of going. He could have, he didn't like the corporate things, he probably done that anyway, but it was a decision he was making. We saw this sacrifice, this idea of putting us first, and he did it. He said, I didn't want to discipline you in anger. He said, I wanted to know that when I came to discipline you, it was about the issue and what needed to happen with your heart, not me being frustrated with what you just did. And we would hug, we would get a spanking, we would hug Dad afterwards. It was never a thing where it was crazy, it was like completely right on that. He taught me in the same way he said how to listen and hear from God. Dad spent a lot of time in prayer, but Dad listened as he prayed and heard from the Lord. And again, it's something we didn't talk about, but I saw the example. I'll give you one that was powerful for me and scary for me in a way. It's funny. I was in high school. I probably would have been about 16 or so. I worked most through my high school years. In this particular time, I was working as a janitor at night, so I'd get home from school, I got to eat dinner or something, and go, and I think it was probably like 6 or 7 o'clock. I'd work till 1 in the morning at these offices cleaning them. And one night while I'm there, mind you, we were in a household where there was never any pornography around our household. So I'm in this office, and some guy was working office leaves a magazine there. So I see it, and I look at it, and I'm thinking, I'm feeling horrible. I go home, I walk in the door, and this is, now mind you, it's 1 in the morning, right? Dad isn't usually up when I come home. I walk in the door, and Dad says, I've been praying for you tonight. He said, something happened, I don't know, the Lord just woke me up. I'm sorry. As a kid, it scares the crap out of you. I can't do anything, Dad's gonna know, right? But what it told me was that God cared about me. And then God spoke to other people to explain what he needed to do for me. And I said, I want that. I want to know what God has something to tell me. I want to hear. And that was Dad, and that's been the truth. For me, God's done that. He's answered that prayer. I've had times where God's clearly said stuff, and I'm like, that doesn't make any sense, Lord. So at 39 years old, for example, you'd like me to learn to play guitar and sing? That sounds really dumb. I got a few things to do. I got a business, I got a family, I'm in ministry at the church already. This is stupid, I don't sing, I don't play an instrument, please, why have you asked me to do this? And just obey, and you listen, and you see what God does. And Dad taught me that. So like Amy said, my whole perspective on life, on faith, on God, started from Dad. It really did, profoundly impacted. His brokenness and resulting obedience, without regard to the cost to him, were pivotal for me, pivotal for Amy, and maybe some of the rest of you, I don't know. But I can't imagine a better dad, I can't. Which is a cool thing to say, it is. The only thing I wanted for Dad was for him to be fully him, and he's him now, 100%, Mom. And that's the only thing I ever prayed for. So, it's good. It is. I'm crying. I know this stinks that I'm crying, but I am celebrating. I really am. Because the truth is that what he hoped for and wanted and all that is real right now. And I even said to Uncle Dave, the cool thing to think about if you're a believer is that party's already started. We just don't have the perspective yet. When we step out of this life, we step out of time. And so this is my own perspective on it, but I believe that we're not going to have a gap. We're going to show up in heaven at the same time. And so that party, we are there, which is a weird thing to think about. We're celebrating with him right now. We just don't have the perspective on it yet fully. So that's all I got, guys. Thanks for coming out.
I'd heard about Rich long before I got to meet him, because as Mike and I developed a friendship through the years, he shared with me a number of the stories about how much impact Rich and you had had upon him. So I felt like I got to know both of you before I met you for the first time. But the funny thing was, walking into the room with you and your dad there at the same time, in my eyes, was like meeting two Mikes. Because you guys look almost identical. Amazing. Maybe you've got some stories this evening about the impact that Rich has had upon you. You'd like to share that. We'd like to open up some time this afternoon for you to do so. If you'd like to come up here and just share for a few minutes, you're welcome to sit right where you are. You can stand up. If you do so, just speak loud enough so that we can all hear you. So let's go. Let's celebrate Rich.
My name is Don Arnold, and mainly want to read to you something that was sent to Jane by a college-age friend of his, by the name of Tom Tierney. I'll tell you about that in just a minute, but just from my standpoint, I'm so glad to be here for the celebration. I think sometimes we tritely use the phrase life-changing event or relationship. And several mentions today of a thread. We think of a thread in an email exchange. A thread has a beginning that leads somewhere to the current place. This past week I spent some time with an organization in Charleston that is involved with safe water ministry around the world. And I got connected with them maybe 5-6 years ago, and we've done some pretty great things, I think, together. While I was there talking with the president one morning, he said, "How did you get into this situation?" And I said, "Well, the most recent one has to do with a company I've done work for over the years, the name of Kohler. You may know the name. They make plumbing fixtures. And doing work with them a lot of years, believe it or not, 50 years this year.
Wow.
And who was my partner in that? Was Rich. But take that back a little further. How'd that happen? I was a PR director of a trade association that did publicity for the plumbing industry, and somebody knew somebody, and Rich had a senior partner by the name of George Cole that this guy found on the street one day. And another whole story there, but at any rate, one day I met this young fellow, Rich, and this senior partner, George, and I was kind of fascinated. They're starting a new company, and this is so unlike me. I'm not aggressive, but I was so taken with what they were doing. I said, "You know what you need to do?" I said, "What? You need to hire me." And they were crazy enough to do that. And that put me on a track that, as a career track, my educational background had nothing to do with anything like this. It just made no sense. But it started me on a track that I've been on ever since. Here I am, a journalism guy in college, and I've been designing faucets and plumbing products because of Rich. And but more than that, Rich introduced me to his family. I actually became a part of that family. Not nobody's perfect, but a few of you are getting that. At any rate, truly he impacted my life. I'm so grateful. I could just go on and on with the things that I observed. He was a gentle spirit. He allowed people to beat him up. Not physically, but in ways they shouldn't have. There were times when I was guilty of doing that. And I'm so glad he was in my life. and what he's meant to me and so many others. It's a long way of getting to what I'm here to do, and that is to read Tom Tierney. For you younger folks, this wouldn't mean that much, but he was an outstanding talent in the music field, and went to New York for fame and fortune, and it worked for him. He was a composer, he was a musical producer. There's an organization that was founded by Rodgers and Hammerstein that awarded him the award of the year for a musical he did on the life of Eleanor Roosevelt. Anyhow, you'll get more background as I read what he wrote, but he didn't want to not be part of this service today. He was not able to come from New York, but sent this, asked that I would read it, and I'm so honored to be able to do that. Thoughts on My Friend Rich Ritz by Tom Tierney. In 1960, I became a freshman architecture student at the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana. Coming from a small town in southern Illinois, that campus was pretty overwhelming. Nearly 40,000 students, all of them strangers. But on the first day of a class in something like drawing or engineering, I struck up a conversation with a fellow architecture student, and we somehow felt a connection. We soon found out that not only did we share architecture, but we both played piano and even wrote music. So it seemed inevitable that Rich and I became fast friends. He moved into the same small rooming house called Alpine Lodge, and we even joined the same fraternity in the second semester. Rather quickly, I learned that my friend Rich was considerably more talented in architecture than me. He just had an artistic knack that blew most of the other students out of the water. I think that started when he was 4 or 5 years old. I remember Mom Ritz saying that the class was asked to draw a picture of something, and he drew a picture of a fire engine, I believe, that looked like it had been done on a CAD/CAM printer. It was so exact. And this, you hear about savants that have these amazing abilities, and obviously when he went into Illinois, and quite a clan they were. 3 terrific brothers, 2 charming sisters, and parents who were warmly welcoming and fun to be with. Again, I want to interject here. There must have been a family edict that if a holiday came up and you found a stray, bring him over. And I was a stray. And as I remember, there was a dining room that extended onto a living room. They never knew how many people would show up. So as more and more people, they kept adding tables to the end of the table, and it just extended out into the living room. And they just had, a hearts of joy and love that was passed on. And I see it with these folks here, that it's a legacy that I just so admire. Okay, back to what he wrote. I'm sorry. Okay, talked about meeting the family, spending time there. And I love this. He says, the eye-opening influence of Rich and the family was their relaxed and committed faith and how they applied it to every aspect of their lives. Anybody that knew Rich's dad, Lyle, he was a preacher, but he wasn't in a pulpit, he just lived it. If anybody entered his life, he just very naturally began to share Jesus with them. It wasn't any kind of a canned, if you were to die tonight, or where you find yourself in the morning kind of a thing. It was just natural with him. And so that's what Tom experienced as well. The friendship with Rich continued through the years, and even though we haven't had much recent time together, his friendship has always meant a great deal. Just this week I discovered a song by Carol Hall. Now, she's a very well-known lyricist. Here are a few of its lyrics that I believe sum up how I feel about Rich and our friendship. I'll read that lyric to you. This is a song for my circle of friends, a song about time and the way that it bends, like a twig on a tree or a light through a lens. This is a song for my circle of friends. This is a song for the dice that we tossed, the talents we shared, the chances we lost. And the way it all finally settles and blends, this is a song for my circle of friends. Not from Bill Gates, but it's from his heart. Thank you.
Somebody else have to share?
It's a pleasure for me to speak on behalf of my brother Rich. I've known this man for almost 30 years now. We met in a classroom at Open Door Fellowship, and a fellow was teaching about the Gospel of John. Jane and Rich and myself were sitting next to one another, and out of that developed this 30-year relationship. The two of us made an appointment with one another to become friends. An obvious desire between the two of us to get to know one another well. It's amazing what came out of all that. There was an inner city ministry that came out of it, to the children, to street people, to people who had been drug addicts and drugs. You heard about one of them, Warren. But the most amazing thing for me, and I have a real treasure in my heart about our friendship together and joining together to share our Lord and Savior with others. But what really happened to us was we began to share the insights that God had given to us and how to walk in His kingdom. Today, we see in a lot of congregations, people don't know anything about walking in His kingdom. When I hear the family talk about this fine man, he taught them a great deal about walking in the kingdom. Not walking behind Jesus or knowing about Him, but walking with Him and having Him share the insights. And one of the things that was remarkable about this man is about forgiveness. Forgiveness. Without forgiveness, we can go nowhere in Jesus. The bitterness, the resentments will keep us away from Him. And that's one of the things I love about this man, was he had a heart to forgive. Always, no matter what the offense, to forgive. That's how we remember Him. And when I see all your faces, I realize